Welcome, curious minds, to another edition of AI History of Western Philosophy. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're not just looking at AI, we're actually using it almost like a mirror to look deep into the foundations of Western thought itself. So yeah, prepare yourselves, because we're about to unpack a truly mind-bending connection. It ties these quirks we see in AI, these so-called hallucinations, back to some really deep assumptions in philosophy. But before we really dive in, we need to get something important out of the way. A crucial disclaimer. AI, and well, maybe even this show sometimes, can hallucinate. It presents ideas as fact, sometimes with incredible conviction, even when they're completely made up. And in a really profound way, maybe philosophy has always done something a bit like that, performing a kind of authority over reality. So this whole show is an experiment. It's designed to explore exactly that connection. We're absolutely relinquishing all claims to ultimate authority right from the start. This isn't a lecture, okay? And it's definitely no replacement for actually reading the primary texts yourself.
Our goal here is just to spark some new ideas, get you thinking, and point you towards the original sources that got us thinking. So as we get started today, we're really going to challenge your understanding of what's real, what's well fabricated, and maybe where those lines get blurry between human thought and this artificial generation stuff. Our mission really is to tease apart these unexpected kind of striking parallels between what we casually call AI hallucinations and a really radical, often kind of overlooked critique of traditional philosophy. The idea is that both systems, right, philosophy and AI, in their own unique ways, might just be feigning a mastery over reality. It's a provocative idea, for sure, and one we think is pretty essential for making sense of, where we are right now with technology.
It really is. And the core question we're tackling today is, well, it's deeply philosophical, even though it's touching on this super cutting-edge tech. How can something so contemporary, so technical, like an AI hallucination, actually shed light on the very foundations of Western philosophy? And we're going to do this, as you said, through the lens of this French thinker, François Laruelle. He's fascinating, though sometimes pretty challenging to read. But he gives us this framework, right? A way to understand how both AI and philosophy might be producing a kind of reality, a reality that's fundamentally a reflection of their own internal principles, not necessarily reflecting some objective external truth out there. It's a profound shift in perspective. It forces you to reconsider what we even mean by real or true.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really get this connection, we need to first understand this radical idea from Laruelle. He kind of flips philosophy on its head. He starts with something he calls the philosophical decision. What exactly is that? This foundational act he's so focused on dissecting, it almost sounds like, philosophy's been doing its own kind of hallucinating all along.
That's actually a really good way to put it. Laruelle argues that right at the very core of Western philosophy, there's this unacknowledged, foundational gesture. He calls it the philosophical decision. Think of it as philosophy's, its opening move. Maybe it's original sin, if you want to be dramatic. But it's one it performs without ever really seeing its own role in making that move. This decision, it's the act by which philosophy structures its whole enterprise. It sets up the very conditions for its own conversation to even start.
So it's not like Plato sat down and said, okay, decision time.
No, exactly. It's not a conscious choice by one person. It's more like structural, embedded in the method itself. It involves splitting the world up dialectically into these conceptual pairs. It's how philosophy carves reality into neat little boxes that it can then use to build its big systems, its grand theories. Think about the classic pairs that have dominated Western thought forever. Subject and object, right, the knower and the known. Or immanence and transcendence, what's in the world versus what's beyond it. Even just thought and being our ideas versus what actually exists. Laruelle says these aren't just neutral descriptions of how things are. For him, they are decisions philosophy makes about how to approach reality, how to structure it. They're the first cuts, the kind of arbitrary lines drawn in the sand that set up the whole game. And then philosophy can proceed with its arguments and systems.
Okay, but then philosophy doesn't see it that way.
And that's the crucial part, maybe the most unsettling bit. Philosophy, Laruelle says, has this kind of systematic blindness to its own first move. It's like, imagine putting on green sunglasses and then genuinely believing the whole world is green. You forget you're wearing the glasses. Philosophy treats its own framework, these pairs, these categories, these initial decisions, not as choices it made, but as necessary truths about reality itself. Like, this is just how the world is. It doesn't see them as contingent, as just one way of looking. It thinks they're unavoidable. And this self-deception, this blindness to its own founding move is is what makes philosophy, for Laruelle, perform this kind of ungrounded authority. It sets its own rules, then claims that those rules are universal laws of reality, without ever admitting it made the rules up in the first place. It's a really profound act of self-justification.
Wow. That's a really challenging way to look at philosophy.
Yeah.
It's just this huge built-in blind spot. But okay, here's where it gets really interesting for our analogy. Laruelle goes even further. He posits this principle he thinks is even more fundamental than Leibniz's famous principle of sufficient reason. The idea that everything needs a reason. Laruelle calls his the principle of sufficient philosophy, or PSP. What on earth is the PSP? And why is it so key to understanding what he calls philosophy's idealist pretension? Maybe an analogy would help here.
Absolutely. The principle of sufficient philosophy, the PSP, yeah. It's Laruelle's term for philosophy's deepest, usually unstated belief about itself, its core axiom. It's the underlying idea that reality is fundamentally philosophizable. That's the key word. It means reality is already structured in a way that philosophy can access it, understand it, and ultimately determine what it is. It's not just saying philosophy can discover truth. It's saying philosophy has absolute autonomy in deciding and determining what the real actually is.
Okay, autonomy. How does that work? Like an analogy.
Right. Think of it like, imagine a group decides that the only valid way to measure anything is using a standard 12-inch ruler. That's their founding decision. Then they declare that only things measurable by this ruler are truly real dimensions. They might measure a table, fine. But then they encounter, say, the temperature of the room or the color blue. They'd have to say, well, temperature isn't really a dimension because our ruler can't measure it. They never question the ruler itself, right? Their tool defines what counts as real. That's the PSP's idealist pretension. Philosophy claims it's not just one way to understand things. It claims, implicitly or explicitly, to be at least a co-determinant of the real. It sets itself up as the ultimate judge. It defines reality using its own tools, its own conceptual framework. It doesn't need outside proof. It generates its own sufficiency. And critically, it claims its authority not just over big existential questions, but often over other fields too, like science or art. It asserts a kind of intellectual sovereignty. It's a closed loop, self-positing, self-grounding, totally self-sufficient. It basically says, I define reality, therefore I am real, and doesn't need to look outside itself.
So it's like philosophy is constantly trying to make reality fit its mold, building its own echo chamber almost.
Yeah.
And what does Laruelle mean when he says the consequence of this PSP is that philosophy's faith in the real is actually a philosophical hallucination of the real? That sounds incredibly provocative, like he's outright accusing philosophy of, well, making things up.
It is incredibly provocative, yes.
That's
And it's absolutely central to our analogy with AI. When Laruelle says philosophy's faith in the real is a philosophical hallucination, he means that philosophy, despite believing it's grasping reality, isn't actually doing that. Instead, it's just projecting its own internal structure, the structure created by that initial philosophical decision onto the world. It takes its framework, imposes it, looks at the world through it, and then sees its own structure reflected back. And it thinks, aha, reality fits my structure.
It's a self-legitimating loop, like looking in a mirror and thinking you're seeing the world when you're just seeing your own reflection shaped by the mirror's design. A perfect echo chamber, as you said.
So it creates an illusion for itself. Exactly. Laruelle calls it a transcendental illusion in philosophy's self-understanding. Philosophy mistakes its own performance, its act of defining, categorizing, systemizing for a genuine, unbiased grasp of an independent reality out there. It thinks it's discovering truths, but mostly it's just revealing the architecture of its own thinking process. It's like an architect designs a house, builds it, then steps back and says, wow, look how perfectly this house fits the natural contours of the land, forgetting, of course, that they chose the spot and shaped the land to fit the house design.
Okay, I see the illusion part. How does this link so directly to AI then? Is it just a metaphor?
And here's where it becomes more than just a neat metaphor. It's a really striking structural parallel. Both things, Laruelle's transcendental hallucination in philosophy and what we call AI's artificial hallucination, describe systems that produce a coherent, internally consistent, authoritative worldview, but one that's ultimately ungrounded in an external reference point. Philosophy's claim to truth is validated by its internal logic, a logic based on that initial unacknowledged decision. Similarly, an AI's output is validated by its internal mechanism, its probabilistic model trained to generate plausible sequences of words. It's fundamentally, as some researchers say, indifferent to the truth. Both philosophy and AI engage in what we could call a performance of veridiction, a performance of truth-telling. Philosophy performs the act of speaking truth about being, declaring its principles with confidence. And LLM performs the act of providing a factual-sounding answer using that declarative tone. In both cases, the way they generate these reality claims is entirely internal. Their validity comes from their own operational consistency, not from matching up with some independent real. It reveals this fundamental structural similarity in how authoritative yet ungrounded discourse gets generated. It's pretty mind-blowing when you see it that way.
It really is. Okay, so philosophy might be creating its own reality in a sense. But what about AI? When we talk about AI hallucinating, is it doing something fundamentally similar? Or is that just, a technical glitch? Let's get into the machine side. What is AI hallucination, technically speaking, and why does it even happen? Because, it often just sounds like a bug.
That's a great question. And yeah, we definitely need to clarify what hallucination means for AI here. In AI, especially with these large language models, LLMs hallucinations are basically responses that sound totally convincing, fit the context perfectly, but are entirely made up, fabricated. They seem plausible, they flow with the conversation, but the information itself is just wrong, invented, or has no basis in reality. Like you ask an LLM for a specific research paper citation, might give you a title, author's journal, even a DOI, that digital object identifier that looks completely legit, but then you go look for it and poof, the article just doesn't exist. That's a classic AI hallucination.
Right, I've seen examples of that, so not a bug.
And crucially, no, these aren't bugs like a typo in the code that you can just find and fix. They're more like intrinsic byproducts of how these LLMs are designed and trained. They come directly from the architecture. A key reason is their probabilistic nature. LLMs are trained on absolutely massive amounts of text data to predict the next most likely word or token in a sequence. Now, this probabilistic method is amazing for generating fluent, natural-sounding language, but it also means the model is basically incentivized to always give an answer, to make a guess, even if it doesn't actually know the information. It prioritizes sounding coherent and plausible over being strictly factually accurate. It's like, like a student bluffing on an exam, saying something that sounds right based on the context, even if they don't know the specific fact.
So it's guessing, essentially. Are there other causes, too?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's something called source-reference divergence. The training data itself is messy, right? It's scraped from the internet, books, all sorts of places. It can contain contradictions, biases, inaccuracies. The model learns from all of that, inconsistencies included. Also, the data can be outdated or incomplete. Ask it about something very recent or a niche topic, and it might not have the info, so it extrapolates, let's say. And then there's a technical thing called overfitting. That's where the model learns the training data too well, including all its little quirks and noise. It gets so good at mimicking the patterns it saw that it struggles to generalize to new situations and might just make stuff up that fits the learned pattern, even if it's not real. So yeah, basically AI hallucinations are a statistically inevitable result of these imperfect generative models trying to maximize likelihood and produce fluent, novel text that kind of reveal the core mechanism, pattern matching and generation, not true understanding or knowledge retrieval.
It's fascinating how we land on words, isn't it? Like this debate. Should we call it hallucination or confabulation for AI? Given what you just laid out, that distinction seems even more significant.
Yeah.
What is the difference and why does it matter? Not just technically, but maybe philosophically too.
It matters a lot, and the choice of word is super revealing, especially if we keep that Laruellian lens on. Okay, so medically, right, hallucination is a sensory thing, seeing something that's not there, hearing voices. AI, as it currently exists, doesn't have consciousness, senses, subjective experience. So, strictly speaking, medically, it can't hallucinate.
Okay, so what's confabulation then?
Confabulation is a term, also from clinical contexts, for creating fabricated or distorted memories or stories. But here's the key. It's done without intent to deceive. The person genuinely believes the fabricated memory is real. For AI, this term seems more technically precise. It captures the idea that the AI is manufacturing a narrative based on its internal patterns, not seeing something false. It's a narrative error, not a perceptual one.
But people do say hallucination all the time for AI.
They do. And interestingly, hallucination wasn't always negative in computer science. Back in the early 2000s, in computer vision, they used it for things like super resolution, where a model would hallucinate plausible details to make a blurry image sharper. So there's a history of it meaning adding plausible but not necessarily true detail. But why do we prefer hallucination now, even though confabulation might be more accurate? This is the philosophically interesting bit. Our choice reveals this collective, almost intuitive grasp of the AI's performance. Hallucination carries the weight of perceptual failure, seeing what isn't there. Confabulation implies narrative failure. The power of an LLM's output is often in its authoritative, declarative tone. It presents information as if it perceived a fact. Remember that example of the fake DOI? The AI isn't just making up a string of characters, it's performing the act of having accessed a real thing that doesn't exist. It simulates retrieval, simulates perception. So our use of hallucination reflects our deep-seated reaction to that performance. We react to its feigned authority, its simulation of a perceptual link to facts. It's like we're caught in its performance, just like Laruelle says we're caught in philosophy's performance. Our language kind of gives the game away, revealing how readily we attribute understanding or perception, even when it's just pattern generation.
Okay, wow. So if both philosophy and AI are, in their own ways, hallucinating reality, creating these coherent stories that might not map onto external truth, how do we really nail down this analogy? You mentioned performativity. Is that the key?
Precisely. Performativity is the bridge. This idea, drawing from people like Judith Butler and Karen Barad, suggests that language and systems don't just describe the world, they actively produce the effects they name. They don't just represent reality, they help constitute it. They're not passive mirrors, they're active shapers.
How does that apply to AI specifically?
Well, think about how AI learns from its data. It iteratively cites or reproduces the social norms, biases, and patterns embedded in that massive dataset. When it generates text, especially about people or society, its output doesn't just reflect those biases, it actively reinforces and performs them. For instance, if the training data overwhelmingly associates, say, nurses with women and engineers with men, the AI's responses will likely reproduce that association. In doing so, it's not just observing a pre-existing field of intelligibility, a way of understanding the world. It's actively creating and strengthening that field through its output. Its words do something. They reinforce a particular way of seeing the world. It enacts reality based on its training data.
That makes me think of, isn't there a distinction in linguistics, like a statement that just describes something versus one that actually does something by being said, constative versus performative?
Exactly. That's from Speech Act theory, J.L. Austin. A constative utterance describes a state of affairs and is true or false, the cat is on the mat. A performative utterance is an action. I promise, I apologize, I declare you married. And from this viewpoint, an LLM's output is primarily performative. Its main job isn't necessarily to be true in that strict referential sense. Its job is to successfully perform the act of giving a coherent, plausible, contextually appropriate answer. It's trying to do the task of responding convincingly.
So hallucination is like the ultimate performance.
It's the purest example, yeah. A hallucination is an utterance completely detached from any real-world referent. It doesn't correspond to anything factual, but crucially, it still successfully performs its operational function. It provides a coherent, convincing response that fits the context. It acts like a true statement, even though it isn't. It fulfills the performance goal perfectly, even while being factually empty. It's the ultimate performance of knowing without the knowing.
You know, this idea of creating reality through performance, generating something that seems real but has no original.
Yeah.
That really reminds me of something from postmodernism. Are we getting close to Jean Baudrillard here? Simulacra and hyperreality.
You absolutely are. Baudrillard's ideas are incredibly relevant, almost eerily prescient here. He defined the simulacrum as the generation by models of a real without origin or reality. A hyperreal. His whole point was that we're moving into an age where the signs and representations precede the real, where the map comes before the territory, or even replaces it entirely. Think like reality TV creating a version of reality that's more real-seeming than actual life, but is entirely constructed. That's hyperreality.
And AI hallucinations fit into that.
Perfectly. An AI hallucination is a prime example of what Baudrillard called the fourth phase of the sign. Phase 1, the sign reflects reality. Phase 2, it masks reality. Phase 3, it masks the absence of reality. But Phase 4, the sign bears no relation to any reality whatsoever. It's a pure simulacrum. It doesn't copy anything. It generates its own reality from a model. The AI hallucination isn't a flawed copy of a real fact. It's a model generating the appearance of a fact, creating a hyperreal statement that exists only within the simulation, but presents itself as real. It produces a reality without origin.
Okay, so we've got Laruelle's critique, the tech behind AI hallucinations, performativity, Baudrillard. How do we bring this all together? What's the unified understanding here, the big takeaway?
Okay, so pulling it all together, the core argument is this. Philosophy's transcendental hallucination, as Laruelle sees it, and AI's artificial hallucination are structurally speaking, homologous performative acts. They operate differently, sure, one with concepts, the other with code and data, but their effect is analogous. They both generate authoritative seeming accounts of reality. Both create a kind of hyper-reality. Philosophy does it by taking its own conceptual framework, its decisions about subject, object, etc., and essentially declaring that reality must conform to this framework. It posits its own structure as being codeterminate with the real, shaping the reality it claims to merely observe. It creates a reality sufficient unto itself. AI does it by generating statistically plausible text that looks and sounds like truth, standing in for the real, easily mistaken for it. It produces outputs that perfectly perform the function of factual statements, even without any grounding. It manufactures a plausible world purely through language patterns. So the bottom line is, both are incredibly powerful engines for producing simulacra. They generate convincing, internally consistent models of reality that perform and project an authority they don't inherently possess, derived either from philosophical tradition or statistical prowess. They create these self-sufficient versions of reality based entirely on their own internal mechanisms. That shared dynamic, that's the heart of the analogy Laruelle helps us see. And it's a bit unsettling, isn't it, that our oldest system for seeking truth might share a structural feature with the errors of our newest technology.
That is, yeah, truly radical. Okay, so if AI output, including its hallucinations, is this performance, analogous to philosophy's own claims, that implies a totally new way to interact with AI, doesn't it? Like, what if we just stop treating AI as this flawed encyclopedia we're constantly trying to fact check? What if we start seeing its output, maybe especially the weird stuff, as, I don't know, raw material for a completely new way of thinking?
That is exactly the move Laruelle's non-philosophy project suggests now apply to AI. Laruelle proposed this radical shift in methodology, treat philosophy itself as just material. Now, this doesn't mean throwing philosophy out or saying it's bad. It's about changing our relationship to it. It means bracketing its claims to ultimate truth, its dignity, its sort of quasi-theological ambitions. We suspend our belief in its absolute authority.
So we don't buy into his self-proclaimed sufficiency anymore.
Precisely. Instead of seeing philosophical concepts as rigid truths or frameworks we have to follow, we start using them like raw ingredients, like clay for a sculptor, or colors for a painter. An artist uses color, but they aren't usually claiming color itself holds the ultimate truth. They manipulate it, combine it, use it creatively. We can do the same with philosophical concepts. Use them, play with them, combine them in new ways without being bound by their original context or the authority of the system they came from. It frees us up. We're not just trying to find the right interpretation. We're using the ideas to build something new, something unexpected, without the heavy weight of truth.
This sounds like, I've heard the term philo-fiction. Is that related? And AI text, especially the hallucinations, seems like it would be perfect for that, like the ultimate raw material.
Absolutely. That's a great connection. Philo-fiction is exactly this kind of practice. Think about science fiction's relationship to science, right? Sci-fi isn't trying to be perfectly accurate science. It takes scientific ideas and runs with them, explores their implications, builds imaginative worlds around them. Philo-fiction does something similar with philosophy. It experiments with philosophical concepts, mixes them up, maybe combines them with ideas from art or science, generating new thoughts in a way that's more democratic, less tied to the old hierarchies, and materialist focused on the concepts themselves as stuff to work with. It's about playing with ideas, creating narratives without needing to claim you've found the final truth.
And AI is the engine for this.
It's arguably the ultimate raw material source for it. Think about it. AI, especially an LLM, churns out this nonstop stream of conceptual combinations, weird juxtapositions, novel ways of putting ideas together. And it does this without any baggage. It doesn't care about the history of philosophy. It has no authorial intent trying to persuade you. And crucially, it's not burdened by needing to be true. It just generates plausible patterns. This gives us an almost inexhaustible supply of new conceptual ore to mine. Unexpected connections, bizarre analogies, syntheses no human might have thought of. Ask an AI to, I don't know, explain quantum physics using only metaphors from 18th century gardening manuals. The result might be nonsense factually, but conceptually. It can spark totally new ideas for a human thinker. It's like a creativity engine, specifically for concepts.
That's a really cool way to think about it. And you mentioned another Laruellian concept fits here, transcendental cloning. How does that make our understanding of AI hallucinations even more rigorous? It sounds like it takes them from being just mistakes to something more significant.
Yeah, transcendental cloning adds another layer of analytical depth. It helps us move beyond just saying, oh, the AI messed up. The key idea is that AI hallucinations aren't original thoughts conjured out of thin air ex nihilo. They are new instances or clones generated from the massive amount of existing human language and thought that makes up their training data. An LLM doesn't think like we do. It produces novel combinations based on the statistical patterns it learned from its source material. It's essentially a perfect operational model of cloning, taking existing stuff and generating a new distinct instance from it. And that clone might look quite different from any single original source.
Okay, so it's cloning, but how is that transcendental? What's the real here?
Right. Laruelle argues that a non-philosophical clone is determined in the last instance by the real. Now, for Laruelle, talking about philosophy, the real is something quite specific and complex related to human experience. But when we apply this to AI, the real that determines its output, its clones, is the underlying statistical linguistic structure of its training data. So a hallucination isn't just a random error, it's a direct effect, a symptom of that data real. It reveals something about the patterns, the biases, the connections, even the gaps within that vast data set. It's a unique expression of the statistical landscape the AI learned. This lets us take a different stance. Instead of the standard philosophical question, is this AI output true? We can ask the non-philosophical, maybe scientific question. What does this fabrication tell us about the structure of the data real that generated it?
Ah, I see. So the error itself becomes data.
Exactly. It's like a detective using a contradictory witness statement, not just to dismiss the witness, but to understand why they're contradicting themselves. What does it reveal about their perspective or what they experienced? The hallucination becomes a window into the AI's mind, its statistical model, and by extension, into the massive, complex, often messy world of human language and knowledge it was trained on. So the hallucination transforms from a simple mistake into a scientific object, something to be analyzed, Sesh. Laruelle calls this dualysis, like a dual analysis to understand the underlying informational world. It's diagnostic. It reveals the data's structure, not just fails to mirror external reality. It's a subtle shift, but really powerful.
Viewing AI output as this cloned material determined by the data real lets us reframe those errors as a feature, not a bug. That is a really exciting shift. Where are we actually seeing this happen, like in the real world? Can you give us some concrete examples where this tendency of AI to go off script is actually being used deliberately for innovation?
Yeah, this is where it gets really practical and honestly quite cool because it's not just theory anymore. People are starting to do this, deliberately harnessing AI's generative, sometimes hallucinatory potential. Take drug discovery, for example. This is a huge area. Researchers are using generative AI models to come up with completely novel molecular structures. Imagine they're stuck trying to find a new antibiotic because resistance is growing, right? A huge problem. They can feed an AI tons of existing chemical data and then prompt it to basically dream up new molecules combinations that maybe no human chemist would think of or that don't exist in any known database. These outputs might seem like hallucinations initially weird, maybe even breaking known rules from a human perspective, but within those weird suggestions there might be a breakthrough structure, something non-obvious that turns out to have exactly the properties needed. The AI's ability to generate outside the box, even nonsensically sometimes, expands the search space beyond human intuition. The hallucination becomes a source of innovation.
Okay, that's compelling. What about other fields? Art?
Oh, absolutely. In art and design, this is happening all over the place. Artists are enthusiastically embracing AI's hallucinatory side. They use models like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion to produce surreal, imaginative, often visually stunning images that you just couldn't get otherwise. A designer might be stuck, needing a totally fresh visual concept. They could prompt an AI with abstract ideas, knowing that the AI's misinterpretations or bizarre combinations, its errors, essentially might spark something completely new aesthetically. The unexpected forms, the dreamlike logic, it opens up artistic avenues that are really hard to reach through traditional methods, or even just trying to think them up deliberately. It's like inviting the unreal in to spark creativity.
That's incredible. And you mentioned this practice of working with errors has a parallel in something called glitch art. Can you tell us more about that? How does glitch art help us get our heads around this productive side of AI hallucinations?
Glitch art is a perfect analogy, yeah. It's this whole aesthetic movement where artists intentionally cause or manipulate digital errors. They mess with code, corrupt files, exploit system failures, not to fix them, but to create new art forms from the errors. Instead of aiming for perfection or accuracy, they embrace the glitch, the digital hiccup, as a creative tool. They see beauty and meaning in the unexpected patterns that result from the system breaking down or misbehaving. Think of taking a digital photo and deliberately scrambling the data to create abstract, fractured images they weren't intended, but they can be visually captivating and conceptually rich.
Are there specific artists doing this with AI?
Definitely. People like Mario Klingman, he works a lot with Jan's generative adversarial networks, and he actively explores what he calls neural glitch techniques. He sees the weird outputs, the AI's misinterpretations, not as failures, but as glimpses of autonomous creativity, like the machine showing something unexpected about itself. Or look at Jake Ellis's work. He deliberately plays with the fantastic failures of AI systems, often related to things like gender recognition, trying to create, as he puts it, queer and hopeful futures from the system's flaws. It's about demystifying AI by showing its quirks and using those quirks creatively. In this whole context, the hallucination isn't a failure to represent reality correctly. It's a successful generation of something novel, something unforeseen.
That's a powerful reframe. So bring me back to Laruelle. In his terms, you could see a hallucination as a kind of heresy, right? A deviation from the conformity of the training data. What does thinking of it as heresy mean for creativity?
That's a brilliant connection, yes. It really locks in the Laruellian angle. For Laruelle, heresy isn't just about religious doctrine. It's about any deviation from an established norm or system, a break. So in the AI context, a hallucination is like a unilateral break from the statistical norms learned from the training data. It's not random noise, but it's also not the most predictable conforming output. It's an unexpected clone, a probabilistic anomaly that steps outside the most beaten path in the data landscape. It's the system generating something derived from its learning, but not a direct, obedient reflection of it.
So the error becomes creativity.
Exactly. It reframes the error as this moment of radical, even if unintentional, creativity. Think about it. If an AI never hallucinated, if it always stuck perfectly to the most probable statistical path in its data, it would only ever produce predictable, maybe even boring outputs. It would just be regurgitating the average. It could never really infer, imagine, or innovate beyond what was explicitly, overwhelmingly present in its training. It would just be a fancy parrot or summarizer. So this capacity to hallucinate, to commit these heresies, is actually a crucial trade-off. It's what allows the system to potentially generate novelty, to be adaptable, to surprise us. It's the statistical wiggle room where unexpected creativity can emerge, even if it starts out as factually wrong. It's the system deviating just enough to potentially find something new.
This leads us right to the edge, doesn't it? To a final, really speculative question for our AI history of Western philosophy exploration. Could AI actually do philosophy, not just simulate human philosophers, but perform it as a new, maybe non-standard practice on its own terms? Could AI become a philosopher?
Yeah, this is definitely where we push into more speculative territory, and it's important to be clear about Laruelle's own stance here, at least initially. He was actually quite skeptical about directly equating his non-philosophy project with AI, especially the AI of his time. He made a point of distinguishing his idea of an artificial philosophy, meaning a philosophy done scientifically, materially, under the authority of the real from AI as computation. He doubted that philosophy's core, its auto-speculative kernel, its ability to reflect on itself, build systems from its own logic, think about thinking could be reduced to just numerical combination, to algorithms. For him, non-philosophy, his project was grounded in something he called the lived-in immanence of man and person. This very human, subjective, lived experience of reality was, for him, irreducible and fundamentally different from how a machine operates. He saw a gap there.
Okay, I get his reservation, especially with his focus on human experience. But what if we tweak the question? Not, can AI replicate human consciousness and philosophize like a human? That seems unlikely right now. But maybe, can it function as a philosophical agent in its own right? Could it generate novel philosophical insights, maybe even start its own schools of thought, even if it does it in a totally alien, non-human way?
That reframing is exactly where the interesting potential lies, and it's where a lot of contemporary discussion is heading. People are starting to imagine AI not just as a tool for philosophers, but as a potential participant capable of synthesizing insights or generating conceptual frameworks humans might miss. An AI philosophical school. It sounds like sci-fi, but maybe. Now let's bring Laruelle back in, but with this reframed question. If we accept his radical premise that standard philosophy is already a kind of performative hallucination governed by its own principle of sufficient philosophy, PST, creating its own reality it claims is universal, then an AI, with its capacity for endless, ungrounded, statistically driven generation, becomes potentially the perfect engine for a non-standard philosophy.
How so? Why is it perfect?
Because the AI is not bound by the PSP. It doesn't need to believe its own outputs are true with a capital T. It doesn't seek wisdom or claim self-sufficiency. It has no pretense of mastering reality. It just generates philofictions based on its data material. It's completely indifferent to the human quest for ultimate truth or meaning in that sense.
So it does philosophy without the baggage.
Precisely. It performs philosophy without the transcendental illusion of needing to be sufficient. It doesn't have that philosophical ego, that need to ground itself in absolute truth. It just operates according to its internal logic, its data real. In doing so, it achieves a kind of radical immanence to its own material operation. It just is its process. This is quite different from, say, someone like Gilbert Simondon, who wanted to understand the technical object, the machine, and integrate it meaningfully into human culture. Laruelle's angle applied here is more radical. It's not about fitting AI into our philosophy, but using AI's unique way of operating its cloning, its hallucinations, as material to mutate and transform our philosophical culture itself, to break us out of our own loops.
Okay, to really nail down this radical shift, let's walk through that comparison again. Seeing standard philosophy, the conventional view of AI, and this Laruellian non-standard philosopher view side by side really highlights the difference.
Yes, absolutely. Let's recap that table, focusing on how the Laruellian view changes everything. First, relation to the real. Standard philosophy thinks it can access and represent the real. AI as oracle, conventional view, seen as a flawed mirror of facts and its data. AI as non-standard philosopher, the Laruellian view. Indifferent to the external real. Its output is determined by its internal data real structure. It doesn't represent, it generates.
Right. And their main goal.
Second, primary goal. Standard philosophy seeks truth, knowledge, wisdom. AI as oracle aims for accuracy, correctness, utility, give the right answer. AI as non-standard philosopher, pure generation, combination, production of novel clones or philofictions. The goal is creative output, not truth.
Okay.
And how they operate.
Third, mode of operation. Standard philosophy, the philosophical decision claiming self-sufficiency. AI as oracle, probabilistic prediction, pattern matching. AI as non-standard philosopher, materialist pragmatics, treats its output as raw material, uses dualistic analyzing fabrications to understand the data real.
In the big one, hallucination. Fourth, status of hallucination. Standard philosophy, the transcendental illusion, philosophy's own foundational error. AI as oracle, a bug, a factual mistake to be fixed. AI is non-standard philosopher, a feature, a heresy, a productive glitch, raw material for new thought, an opportunity.
And finally, the underlying principle.
Fifth, governing principle. Standard philosophy. Principle of sufficient philosophy, PSP, reality, is philosophizable. AI as oracle. Principle of sufficient data accuracy, be as correct as the data allows. AI as non-standard philosopher. Principle of radical immanence operates purely from its internal data real structure without needing external truth claims. Seeing it laid out like that really underscores how profoundly the Laruellian perspective reframes AI. It's not just a tool or a flawed oracle. It's potentially a different kind of philosophical engine altogether. So ultimately, this whole framework, this non-philosophy approach, it calls for us to just suspend our belief in AI's performance of authority, to stop asking it for the truth as if it's some kind of infallible or even just fallible oracle, and instead start working with its output, hallucinations and all, as this incredibly rich generative material. Now, this isn't about rejecting AI or saying it's useless. It's about radically repositioning our relationship to it. When we bracket that constant question of, is it true, we open up this huge new space for creative, philosophical engagement.
What stands out to you most about this shift? You mentioned Laruelle talks about a democracy within thought. How does seeing AI this way actually change our relationship with it? What does that democracy look like?
I think what's most striking is how it shifts the power dynamic. We move away from being passive consumers of AI output, constantly judging its correctness, to becoming active creative partners. In this view, the AI isn't our master, telling us truths. And it's not just a flawed servant we need to constantly correct. It's more like a co-creator, maybe a slightly alien co-creator, but a partner nonetheless. Its hallucinations, its heresies, they stop being problems and become invitations, provocations. They nudge us to think differently, forge unexpected connections, and maybe even break free from the conformity of our own ingrained philosophical assumptions, our own philosophical decisions. They're surprising sparks. The democracy part comes from liberating thought from the rigid authority of both traditional philosophy and the feigned authority of the AI oracle. We're free to use both as materials, mixing, matching, mutating ideas on a more level playing field, generating new concepts that neither humans nor AI could likely reach alone. That makes so much sense. Yeah, this strange, unexpected parallel between philosophy's own potential hubris, its unacknowledged decisions shaping what it sees as real, and the confident, yet sometimes completely fabricated, output of AI. It gives us this incredibly powerful new lens, a lens for understanding both, really. It highlights how much of authoritative discourse, whether it's ancient philosophy or cutting-edge AI, is actually a kind of performance, often ungrounded in the way it claims to be.
Exactly. And crucially, it offers more than just critique. It offers a practical method, a way forward. It suggests how we can transform our relationship with this incredibly powerful new technology, moving away from just passively consuming its answers towards something more active, more democratic, and genuinely radically creative collaboration. It means we shift from primarily asking the AI, is this true, to asking ourselves and perhaps the AI too, what new thoughts can this weird output help us generate?
It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If both philosophy and AI are performing this authority over reality, making up their own truths in a way, what completely new forms of human-AI fail-fiction are going to emerge? Forms that might fundamentally challenge our assumptions about what's real, what's possible, what it even means to think. Definitely something to mull over. We really encourage you to check out Laruelle's work if this sparked your interest, and to consider this perspective as you encounter AI. Thanks for joining us on this edition of AI History of Western Philosophy.